Overcast weather is the best weather, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise. People often claim that summer is the best season. These people are either liars or suffering from paranoid delusions. Oh yeah, what a wonderful time of year, huh? I'm sure do love it when copious amounts of electromagnetic radiation engulf half the planet, frying birds, frogs, and all manner of critters, let alone us humans. Yes, us humans. I don't know if any of you need to hear this, but just because you can't see the sun on a cloudy day doesn't mean it isn't there. It's not precipitation's fault that object permanence completely eludes you. Yes, the sun does play a role, albeit a small one, in sustaining life on this planet. But water, I mean, could you imagine what life would look like if not for water? No, you couldn't, because there'd only be 40% of you. People love greenery for obvious reasons, yet they don't like the phenomena which sustains it. This is the epitome of entitlement, and I won't stand for it. I'll lay down for it, or at the very least, sit down for it. Good more after night, Cosmoronic 18. I'm Fringin, I hope you're all doing well. So we're doing an introspective introduction today. Yeah, sorry for the lack of episodes. It's been a while, huh? I said there'd be... So funny. The last episode. Oh yeah, guys, we're just gonna do them every 2 weeks, every fortnight. I said that there would be new episodes every fortnight, and it's been 3 of those. This was not intentional, obviously. And yeah, sorry about that. It was a combination of, circumstance, but it was also partially just, lack of ideas, which hopefully we'll be getting over that hump now, but I figure it's worth talking about anyway. When I started Cosmoronic, one of my goals was to use the show as a vehicle to discuss topics I find interesting. Obviously, this quote is very applicable in describing my mind, and I've already forgotten who said it, but it's like, small minds talk about people, medium minds talk about events, and big minds talk about ideas. And of course, I have a big mind, so I like them big ideas. I like talking about topics. I like topics more so than individual news stories. But I think that you can often spin out an idea or like some sort of topic from a news story, right? Usually there's something, couched within an individual event that's more interesting to cover. So that's what I like to do. And that's what I wanted to do with the show. I also like novelty. I like talking about different things. I don't like to rehash the same topic. Problem is, when you make videos, when you do multiple podcasts, and when you do live streams, it's kind of difficult, not to. Especially when, in the case of me, my sphere of interest is probably small, I would imagine. I don't know that there are many people who, super duper obsessively focus on just, 1 or 2 things. People typically have a more balanced, slate of interests compared to being obsessively focused on video games and movies and writing. And I mean, I've been talking about these things for a while now, so it can sometimes, I think I sometimes forget how long it's been since I've talked about a topic that may well come up again, in any given week that's interesting and worth expanding on. And hell, maybe my perspective has changed a little bit. Maybe it's a little more developed after some time. And so it might be worthwhile to recover the topic. Maybe use the new circumstance to look at it from a different perspective. It's not like you talk about something once and then, yes, Fringy talked about it. That is the be-all and end-all. There are no other perspectives. There's no other arguments that he's failed to consider. That's it. We got it. We figured it out. Topic, complete, done, resolved. And so maybe the approach that should be taken moving forward is not being so afraid to discuss a topic that I may well have covered before on this show or in a video or elsewhere, and try and reapproach it again. Maybe integrate more of, the relevant news story, into that topic. Maybe that's the way to do it. I'm sure we'll figure it out. He said, famous last words before I don't do an episode for another month and a half. Another one of my goals was to use the show to discuss media that I watched, read, or played in the prior week. That second one's really funny. When have I ever talked about a book that I've read on this show? In 8 months? Once, maybe? That was the goal anyway. I mean, it's not like there's plenty of films, TV shows, books, games that I haven't, consumed yet. And that's even putting to one side that you can always talk about things you've seen. Like, there's never going to be too much time to talk about a movie. There's never going to be enough time in a person's life to watch, like, every film, every TV show, play every game. It's just not going to happen. There will never be a point when it's like, covered all the movies. Yep, I guess that's the end of that. Well, shit, what am I going to do this week? And it's not like I haven't watched old movies or new movies or TV shows or played games this year. I definitely have. I just haven't integrated them enough into the show, when that was one of my main goals. Funnily enough, talking about a lack of ideas with topics, I was so consumed with talking about topics that I had neglected to cover media from which many interesting topics can arise. I haven't done enough coverage of movies or video games in recent episodes, and I'd like to refocus on doing that. To that end, I watched a film called The Sea Beast yesterday, and I quite enjoyed it, and we're going to talk about it. I wonder if I should preface, when talking about movies, it seems like there's an assumption that you're not going to spoil anything, but I don't know that I can talk about films in the way that I want to without doing that. So, I mean, that's just me signposting right now, and in future forever, including for people who haven't watched this episode or any other ones, I will talk about spoilers, so close your ears with tape, or alternatively turn off the video, or alternatively mute it and just sit there in silence while I talk about all the things that happen in the movie. So, the premise. In a fantasy world bearing a resemblance to the early modern period, hunters, financially backed by the crown, venture the seas to slay fearsome monsters which pose a great threat to society. Jacob Holland, played by Carl Urban, is one such hunter, belonging to the crew of the Inevitable led by Captain Crow. The captain harbors quite a grudge against these sea beasts, for one of them, known as the Red Bluster, claimed his eye. Upon slaying this beast, Captain Crow is set to retire and hand the reins of the ship to Jacob, who he essentially views as his son. This is to happen soon, as the crew of the Inevitable end up pitted against a new crown ship in a race to slay the Red Bluster. Shortly after departing on their mission, Jacob discovers that an orphan girl named Macy Brumble, whose parents died at the hands of one of these sea beasts, has stowed away on the ship. She's eager to become a hunter, and the captain decides to let her stay aboard. The crew of the Inevitable find the Red Bluster and nearly kill it, but fearing that the beast will destroy the ship, Jacob and Macy cut it free. The pair fall overboard and are presumed dead after being swallowed by the Red Bluster, but they manage to survive within the beast before rocking up on the island which it and many other beasts call their home. So to cut a surprisingly long story short, the sea monsters are misunderstood, and their reputation is built upon falsehood. Humans believe, fairly reasonably, that the sea monsters are a dangerous scourge, but the sea monsters are only attacking humans because humans attack them first. Macy is adamant that the violence can end if both humans and Red let go of their grudges and simply move on, and over the course of the story, Jacob comes to agree with her, renouncing his life as a hunter and seeking to put an end to the conflict. Those are the broad strokes. The first thing I noticed when watching The Sea Beast is, man, like 3D animation technology, god damn, that's come so far. Like, this film looks fantastic, and it's beyond, or maybe I shouldn't say it like that. The art direction is really cool, but on a technical standpoint, it is super duper impressive. Like, the water in this film is astoundingly realistic, and the environments are beautiful as well. Like, it blows me away how far 3D animation has come, particularly with regard to rendering things realistically. It really seems like the medium has reached a point where essentially any any style could be realized. Like any imagery that you could want, obviously with a lot of work still, is within reach. The technical limitations have been so very eroded through the development of new technologies, rendering tools, and whatnot, that essentially any idea that what one could seek to realize can be realized. And something that's been cool looking at 3D animation over the last few years, which I'd say we have to agree that it's basically in large part attributable to Into the Spider-Verse, is the exploration of different styles of 3D animation. I'd say this film definitely slots into the more conventional camp of how 3D animated films typically look, but even within that camp, it's got its own style that it's carved out. Kind of like a blending of, it's somewhere between stylized realism and cartoon. Like, it's not stylized realism, it's a little bit nudged more towards cartoon than that. More so owing to the characters than the environments, which look super realistic. But of course, it's a stylistic choice. And I think the overall style looks great. Like, the character and world design is excellent. The Sea Beast presents the viewer with a vibrant and interesting place filled with similarly interesting characters. It's a world I would love to see more of, if for no other reason than the film's aesthetic. Like, it's a really nice film to look at. I hadn't heard of this film until a couple of days ago. I think it came out quite recently. But it seems like Netflix films in particular, they just sort of come and go very quickly. Like, there's not a lot of hype and anticipation built up for them, which I wonder if, I don't know if that's like a byproduct of the streaming age where there isn't as much anticipation for films that come out, you know, on streaming services. Maybe it is a matter of everybody basically watches a film that comes out on streaming when it comes out. So the amount of discussion surrounding that thing is really focused on like 1 week compared to, you know, say Top Gun, which, because it persists in theaters for weeks, it just keeps getting talked about. Though I don't even know if that makes sense. You know, a film on streaming it's the same thing. It's out and available to watch in perpetuity. Nothing is different, but it just feels like the films get less focus, which is unfortunate because I think this film deserves a good amount of focus. Because putting to one side all of the achievements on a technical standpoint, in terms of animation, character design, world design, even putting all of that to one side, I think that the Sea Beast, it reminds me of the older Pixar films in terms of the story that it's trying to tell. It's not quite as good as those films, but it reminds me of those films. What I like about the older Pixar films is how willing they were to explore themes which are headier than those typically found in other theatrical animated films. I sometimes wonder if when Pixar essentially surpassed Disney Animation Studios as the like pioneers and the top dog of animation, I sometimes wonder if more of that was simply attributed to them being groundbreaking from a technical standpoint, at the expense of the recognition of the quality storytelling that was in those films. Pixar were pioneers in more than just their animation. Like, the storytelling that they were doing, I would say is like downright bold, and still is, and kind of is compared to what they're doing now. Like, think about The Incredibles and the many things it has to say about the nature of superheroes, personal fulfillment, duty. Think about everything WALL-E has to say about humanity's nature and its relationship with Earth, you know, artificial intelligence. Think about the message of Ratatouille, that not everybody can cook, but that a great cook can come from anywhere. Like, that's a genuinely interesting idea. And what's cool about it is it's an idea that is a lot more honest and realistic than what they could have gone for, which is anybody can cook, as opposed to the message that they go for, which is not everybody is capable of doing it, but that potential can emerge from, like, anywhere. I like how I just restated the theme in a different way. I mean, the theme speaks for itself. It's a really strong one. And you can pull these types of themes from Finding Nemo, from Toy Story, from Monsters, Inc. I'm not sure about Cars. I don't think I've actually watched Cars again since I watched it for the first time, like when it came out in 2006. And the funny part is, because I'm pretty sure even back then, Cars didn't make much of an impression on me and seemed like a really odd film amidst the rest of their catalog. But I would imagine that film is actually pretty solid compared to what we often see now. But that's what we saw in those older films. Interesting ideas, and perhaps more importantly, honest ideas. Concepts that weren't sugar-coated to make them more broadly appealing. Consequently, they ended up being pretty broadly appealing because what they had to say was meaningful. I said that The Sea Beast reminds me of these older Pixar films, and the reason why I say that is because The Sea Beast has something to say, which is probably why I like it so much. It's pretty focused in what it has to say, but it explores it in different ways. The theme is essentially, the cycle of violence is bad. I find it interesting that theme has so been tainted by The Last of Us 2. But that's the theme of this film. But it presents this point with more nuance than a lot of purportedly mature stories. So again, we come back to the premise. You know, a story where you have, you know, essentially animals that are animated and rendered as being, you know, pretty adorable, or at the very least, like, not utterly terrifying. Terrifying in some contexts, but easily translated into a more appealing aesthetic, like a more comfortable aesthetic in different circumstances. It's not exactly like the most surprising revelation in the world that they're misunderstood and that they're not the bad guys. But it's not the idea itself, it's where it's taken. As eventually becomes apparent in the film, nobody but the Crown is presented as being in the wrong. Both the hunters and the beasts are acting in their own rational self-interest based on the information available to them. The humans rightly perceive the beasts as dangerous because in all of their encounters with them, the beasts will attack them, they've killed people, they're dangerous. And yet the beasts rightly perceive the humans as dangerous themselves and attack them. Neither group is presented as wrong. In fact, it's recognized that there are heroes among the hunters, despite their quest being folly. That is a surprisingly nuanced perspective to present, where you have, you know, a group that is largely comprised of our, you know, POV characters, our protagonists. They're all like good people going out, being very dutiful and doing it to protect lives and achieving, you know, undeniably heroic feats, you know, as they embark on their quest. But what they're doing is it's wrong. But they're very heroic in doing it. That wasn't what I was expecting to get as like a message in this film. It's super important in the story and propelling the characters, especially Jacob, and his relationship with Captain Crow. And I mean, it pertains directly to Macy as well, because this is the perspective that, it's a perspective that she holds that gets challenged, which she changes her mind on a lot more quickly than Jacob does. Because what's essentially established as a dynamic between them is that Macy escapes from the orphanage that she lives in, meets up with Jacob and is like, I want to be a hunter. You know, I'm super excited to be a hunter. My lineage, like, my parents were hunters, but they died doing it, but that's not going to deter me from doing it. And, you know, it's acknowledged that they died, you know, heroes. They died as heroes. But as the story progresses and as they come to understand more about Red and the monsters themselves on the island that they stay on, it just becomes necessary for them to start to reconsider the nature of these creatures, which eventually leads them to realize that maybe, which might be the more relevant part, like at first it's maybe this conflict was initiated by humans, and Jacob is obviously pretty resistant to where this conclusion would invariably lead to, which is, oh, but your, like, parents were heroes. You know, the people who perished, people who I know, you know, were heroes. To which she retorts, essentially, that just because they were heroes doesn't mean that what they were doing was right. Like, that's some nuance. And it's a theme that is well supported by the characters that we see. Jacob is like he's a great guy. He is I wouldn't describe him as a quintessential hero, but he's definitely a hero, you know? He saves people, does bold things, has a good heart. He's not like totally and utterly competent at all times, like he makes mistakes, doesn't get things right. But he tries despite it, which is super admirable. But I guess we can get to that later, because I think with relation to the theme, something that the film does a great job of doing is leveraging different POVs to reinforce the theme. If we took like 3 important POVs and how they tie into the theme of stopping the cycle of violence, be Captain Crow, Jacob, and Macy. So Captain Crow finds it very difficult to let go of his grudge against Red, because he has had many negative experiences with sea beasts. Like, he's had a life to reinforce the perspective that at first he would have only ever learned based on the stories that he had told, you know? It's just comes to be accepted that the beasts are dangerous, regardless of where that myth might have emerged from. That's just accepted as true, and it's reinforced as true based on the way that the beasts interact with humans, which in part is propelled by, you know, humans attacking them and hunting them. Conversely, you have Macy, who, despite both of her parents being killed by a beast, she herself has no personal experience with the beast, and so she is the quickest to conclude that they're misunderstood. What she's been told hasn't yet been reinforced by experience. Meanwhile, Jacob is somewhere in the middle. He has a lot of reasons to dislike the beast, but unlike Crow, he doesn't have enough of them to prevent him from seeing what's in front of him. I think that you often see in strong stories are leveraging a POV to, you know, like you don't want to... What does it mean to have different characters in your story and to have them clash and interact with each other and have their competing ideologies challenged if those competing ideologies don't really stem from anything logically? Life experience is really a valuable tool in terms of creating characters, because life experience is what reinforces or develops a perspective in a character. The really potent part of narrative that we're all there to see is the clashing of these ideas, the conflict, the change and the growth. Though not all characters have to change, as we've discussed before. Leveraging that conflict is where all of the really interesting parts of narrative stem from. And in the case of this film, I think they've done a pretty good job of giving each of these characters a set of traits and beliefs and worldviews that make sense given who they are and the experiences they've had. And they tie directly into the theme, which is really cool. Something that gets dabbled with a bit in the film, not too much, is when it comes to the cycle of violence, is essentially the point of who cares who started it when we can end it. By the end of the film, I think it takes a pretty conclusive stance that humans started it, and that it was specifically started by the Crown to advance their interests, which I think is a reasonable conclusion to come to, given what we see in the story. But I mean, it's also played with earlier on that, like, maybe humans started it, maybe the monsters started it, maybe there was some fundamental misunderstanding that caused it all, but regardless, you know, what does that matter now if there is a root out of the violence? And what I think, because, like, what's being presented here is already, like, reasonably developed, compared to what I was expecting. But then when we have moments in the film, such as when the, Jacob, Macy, and Red, arrive at the place that they were heading towards, and then they discover the Crown ship that's competing against the Inevitable. And then there's like a fight that happens there. Macy gets hurt. Jacob actually, at this point, having already renounced being a hunter, having been convinced out of this position, shoots at Red to try and stop her from continuing to attack the boat and hurt more people. And we have it in this moment, as well as at the end of the film, when Red has been taken to the big city where the king and queen live to then be killed, basically to become like a trophy, like a statue, when she's cut free by Macy and then is causing damage in the city and is ready to attack Captain Crow. And Macy stands in front of Captain Crow to stop Red. You can see in that moment, like, the film is putting a level of onus on Red, and by extension the monsters, to also stop the violence. It is also incumbent upon the beasts themselves to let it go and stop the violence. Essentially, we have the theme, the cycle of violence is bad. It's bad. And unlike, for example, The Last of Us 2, what do you do to stop it? What do you need to do to stop the cycle of violence? And how is the that choice reinforced. In The Last of Us 2, the conclusion is you stop the cycle of violence by letting it go, essentially. Ellie lets it go. Her reward for letting it go is that she loses her fingers, can't play the guitar, Dina has left her, and she is all alone, and everything is terrible. And of course, the person she lets go was let go after Ellie had already killed many people who had done nothing to her personally, because of that good old ludonarrative dissonance. This is what one could describe as a very thematically confused story, as opposed to what is presented here, which is the same perspective. Let it go. You have your grudges. Maybe you personally feel justified in having that grudge because in terms of your self-contained experience of life, you've been wronged. Yes, that's true, but it can all stop, and you should want it to stop. Let it go. You know, that's essentially the message that's presented by the film. Like, it's not even that complicated. It really isn't. But like, it's consistent, and it's consistently reinforced, and it's developed in a logical way over the course of the story. It could be said that the conclusion is a little too happy, because obviously everybody lets it go. It's a happy ending. The sea beasts live in peace. The days of the hunters are over, and I presume the society is entering into a new, probably going into like some sort of revolution to turn into like a constitutional republic or something. It's a very happy ending, when I would imagine that in a film that is, you know, not in large part aimed towards children, that you would want a more nuanced, even more nuanced exploration of it, where it doesn't just end immediately. Maybe like it starts to slow down and there's flashpoints of violence between hunters and beasts as it dwindles down, as opposed to like a dead end, happy ending, you know, it's all over. And of course, you don't want to just say like, well, it's a kid's movie, so it doesn't need to do that. At this point, we're just talking about the things that they could do to nudge it from good into great territory. Because I think it'd be comfortable, you know, in conjunction with the fact that the story itself that's told is very fun and engaging. Like, I'd be happy to say that this is a good film. A large reason why is because this film was actually, because it's 2 hours long, so it's actually longer than a lot of theatrical animated films. I didn't feel that length. It really felt like it went by pretty quickly. Maybe because the central story itself is pretty straightforward. What really makes up for it is it's just that it has good characters. They're well defined and likable. Like I said, Jacob is a great hero. I also thought Macy was a strong protagonist, being inventive and empathetic, observant, having a much more her more optimistic view of the world was suited well with Jacob's more, I guess, realistic view of the world. And essentially, thanks to her being able to be nudged towards a more optimistic worldview, which, you know, essentially enables the story to conclude as well as it does, like as happily as it does. It's a strong pairing. Both characters complement each other well. I also really like the dynamic between Captain Crow and his first mate, Sarah Sharp. And really, like, for as little time as we saw them, I quite liked the crew of The Inevitable. It was a fun band of characters. It's a fun enough band of characters that I'd be alright with seeing like a prequel story which just sees them going on adventures. Though I imagine this is probably a one and done story, which is totally fine with me. All in all, I think The Sea Beast is a solid movie, which I would wholeheartedly recommend watching. Spider-Man PS4 is no longer Spider-Man PS4. I guess it already wasn't, given the game released on PS5 nearly 2 years ago. Maybe it used to be called Spider-Man PlayStation, or alternatively Spider-Man PS4 and PS5. Spider-Man is now on PC. I don't have much to say about the port of the game, though I hear PlayStation fanboys aren't thrilled. That would be really funny if it wasn't, well, it's actually, no, it being embarrassing is what makes it funny. It's stupid and lame to be angry that more people get to play a game you supposedly like, but as I was saying, I don't have much to say about the port. I'm more interested in what the port represents. We seem to have entered into an era of multi-platform dominance. There are fewer exclusive games now than during prior generations, and many flagship games for Xbox and PlayStation have found their way to the PC platform, albeit a few years later for the latter. What should this tell us about the modern gaming landscape? Well, I have some thoughts on that. What is the role that exclusive games play? I think conventional wisdom and common sense would suggest that exclusive games are a boon for the sales of their respective consoles. That's certainly a perspective that I held for a while. I mean, I remember talking about this topic back in the day, and I think my perspective at the time was always, this is really good for consumers, like more games being available on more platforms, but does it make sense for like Xbox to have all of their games release on PC? But, I mean, you know, what does it say now? Like, what are we meant to make of the porting of every Xbox game and a lot of PlayStation games to PC? It would seem to suggest that they aren't that important in determining the sales of a console. Or maybe software sales matter more to Sony and Microsoft than they used to. I guess it might be worthwhile, before we go any further, to discuss what is essentially the model behind a console. Consoles, and being like a console manufacturer, like a company that makes and sells consoles, that's a different business than what everybody else in the landscape is doing. It's a platform that you administer. You gotta design the hardware, you gotta get the hardware in the hands of developers, you've gotta manufacture the hardware on a mass scale and sell it, and a lot of the time, it used to be that a lot of consoles would be sold at a loss, where every single unit they'd be incurring a cost, because, you know, essentially selling something that is, you know, reasonably powerful as a piece of consumer hardware at a price that is reasonable for most people, that's tough. And traditionally, it's been so tough that a lot of consoles have been sold at a loss. To which, you know, one might be thinking, so why make consoles if selling the consoles themselves doesn't make you that much money? Well, basically, every game that sells on PlayStation, Sony gets a cut. Every game that sells on Xbox, Sony gets a cut. It's not Sony, Microsoft. Every game that sells on Xbox, Sony gets a cut somehow. No, Microsoft gets a cut. Same goes for Nintendo. The goal as a console manufacturer is to create an ecosystem through which you make a bunch of money. That's basically the model. And so it can be okay to sell your console at a loss in order to make the price more appealing, to build up a stronger consumer base, and to therefore make more money from not only the sales of your games, but third-party games. Like, that's a big part of the model. And so it makes sense that you would want exclusive games on your platform, because whatever amount of money you lose from not being able to sell a game on more platforms, you'll make up for with more people on your platform, and therefore more revenue being generated via your platform. Games are being released on PC mainly now. Like, the form of multi-platform that we're seeing is console exclusives, a somewhat oxymoronic term, which essentially describes a new type of multi-platform game which isn't released on a competing platform. So, for example, Halo Infinite is a Xbox exclusive, even though it's on multiple platforms and is therefore not exclusive. But it is, because you can't play it on PlayStation 5. The same goes for God of War, which you can't play on Xbox, even though you can play it on PC. So when we say that, like, exclusive games are over, in a sense, they still kind of live on, but in a way that is essentially a lot more multi-platform than it used to be. But getting back to the point, it's a simple calculus, or at least it has to be. However many sales you're gonna make by releasing your game exclusively on your platform, you are foregoing that to release it on PC, presumably because you think that you will make more money by releasing it on PC than you would releasing it exclusively on your console, and hopefully driving PC players to buy that console. Maybe that's... I wonder, how many people who play games on console are in the same camp as me, and that the only games that they buy for that console are the exclusive games, and then every other game that they buy is on PC? And if that's the case, are you really attaining the utility of that, from that arrangement, where somebody buys a PlayStation, only buys, like, Spider-Man, God of War, Uncharted 4, but they never buy Call of Duty, they never buy FIFA, they never buy Assassin's Creed, they never buy any multi-platform games, and thereby a very small amount of profit is generated from that transaction for Sony. So much so that it might be more worthwhile to release Horizon on PC than to hope that some people on PC will buy a PlayStation to play Horizon. maybe the overlap between PC and console players is small enough to justify lost console sales. No matter what you make of it all, the moral of the story is that PC gaming is becoming an even better option with every passing year. You get everything. You don't have to worry about, as people are speculating, whether or not Call of Duty will remain on PlayStation after 2024, I believe. Now that Microsoft owns Activision and now owns Call of Duty. You don't have to worry about that on PC. You're always going to get these games because everybody, this seems to be the new lesson here, everybody wants to sell their games on PC. Xbox Game Pass is the company's main product, and selling it to PC gamers clearly matters more than convincing some PC gamers to buy an Xbox. The service is the main product now for Xbox, and it seems to be going quite well. From what I understand, Xbox Game Pass is growing with each passing year, generating a ton of revenue for Microsoft, getting more people immersed in the Xbox platform. It seems to be working very well, and a large part of why it's working is the uniformity, the synergy between Xbox and PC. That every game you could want to play on Xbox will also be available on PC, and, most importantly, will be available on Game Pass day one. It is a very good model by the looks of things, and a reasonably good deal for players. And if we're also adding more games through Bethesda and through Activision, which is a huge catalog, the more games that get added to that service, the more appealing it will be, and presumably the more money Microsoft will generate. And so at this point, how much does it matter to sell people an Xbox compared to how much does it matter to just get people to buy Game Pass, whether that be via PC or through an Xbox, of which they seem to be selling pretty well. Not as well as the PlayStation 5, evidently, but still pretty well. And who knows how it looks in a couple of years when Microsoft has more games releasing. Because right now it seems like we're in a bit of a dry spell, but that's probably going to be changing in the future. But what about Sony? Do they intend to turn PlayStation Plus into a competing service? I know they've released like a new subscription tier, but from what I understand, it is confusing and expensive and not great. And in order to remain competitive with Microsoft, it's probably got to change. And I mean, ultimately, if they're building up PlayStation Plus, is the goal going to be to eventually have it make its way to PC? Is there enough space in the market for another vendor alongside Steam, Epic Games Store, Xbox? Like, is there enough space on the PC platform for Sony to sell a service? Or will it have to continue as it does now, where they release their games on Steam? But if they want to make a service, and if they want to sell a service in the same way that Microsoft does, and if that makes as much money as it seems to be making and grows every day, I imagine they'll want to. Does this mean that, inevitably, games will be coming to PC at the same time as they do PlayStation 5? Will we be moving past this model, where a game will be on PS4 for a while, and then eventually make its way to PC, like we saw with God of War, Horizon, now Spider-Man, I believe Uncharted as well? If this happens, and it may well, honestly, then the era of exclusive games will be well and truly over. Does the end of exclusive games as a major business model signal a shift away from platform in the traditional sense? When you think of a platform, you think of like a console. You think of PlayStation 5, Xbox. Has the definition broadened thanks to live service, subscription services, streaming? And I imagine that they'll give cloud streaming a try again. I can see that happening. I'm pretty sure Microsoft has invested over the last decade billions of dollars into the cloud. I remember when that used to be a marketing shtick. That at this point, thinking of a platform as being bound to a piece of hardware, like a single piece of hardware, it's just archaic. Microsoft doesn't want you bound to the Xbox console. They want you bound to the Xbox ecosystem. And the Xbox ecosystem stretches beyond the console. it's on PC, it's on your phone. It may well just be broadly integrated into other Microsoft products as well. The more important thing, where it used to be about getting you invested in a console, is to just get you invested into a platform, for as nebulous as that may be. But then there's Nintendo, who are just this outlier in this conversation. Nintendo is unlike Sony and Microsoft in that the main selling point of their console has been exclusive games for well over a decade. The best selling games on PlayStation and Xbox are often multi-platform games, Call of Duty, FIFA. Of course, the PlayStation games do tend to be like the top selling games on PlayStation. They're up there. They're certainly up there. Same with Halo and Xbox. But it's, it's a little bit more competitive. All of the best-selling games on Nintendo Switch are published by Nintendo, and they sell very well. For reference, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is the best-selling game on Switch, having sold 46.82 million copies. It's followed by Animal Crossing New Horizons at 39.38 million copies. So over a third of Switch owners have purchased these games. That is a rate of attachment that is, it's not the same on other platforms. It just isn't the same. The ratio of how many people buy Nintendo games, like for every owner, how many of a Nintendo game they buy, is staggering. And it's been this way for a while. It was the case on the Wii U. It was the case on the Nintendo Wii, definitely. It was the case on the GameCube, and it was the case on the Nintendo 64. When you buy a Nintendo platform, you are buying it because you want to play Nintendo games. That is the reason why you own a Switch. It's certainly the reason why I own a Switch. And I mean, we see that it's as well, the Switch is functionally different enough from a PC that there may well be a utility to buying a Switch as a piece of hardware compared to a PlayStation, which is essentially, PlayStation and Xbox are basically more limited PCs, whereas a Nintendo Switch isn't. Though it seems like the Steam Deck might be changing that. I'll be curious to see, though I really doubt that Nintendo is ever going to be releasing Mario on PC. I really doubt that. But isn't that interesting that I don't doubt that as much with PlayStation anymore, when I really did a few years ago, unlike Microsoft, which has for a long time kind of dabbled with releasing games on PC. For pretty obvious reasons. I guess all that tells us is that Nintendo consoles still benefit significantly from their exclusive games, and that'll probably not change for so long as the company creates unique hardware, though. At this point, I think a Switch Pro, if not a Switch 2, is very welcome at this stage. So what are we to make of all this? Well, in my opinion, this paradigm shift is a good thing. More people being able to play more games is better for players, and it's better for developers. It used to be that exclusive games made a lot of sense from the perspective of companies like Sony and Microsoft, but maybe they don't anymore. And look, I'm not gonna cry about it, that's a good thing. Like, we joked before about people being upset that games that were exclusive to their favorite platform, for which their identity is heavily tied, are really upset that more people get to play games. This is a bizarre perspective to have. Surely if you like a game, and you think the developers are great, and you want them to be rewarded for their hard work, surely you would want those games to be released on more platforms so that more people can share in the game that you love, and the developers can get more attention for it, and more money to fund their next project. Something logical as a thought process. I guess fanboyism is eternal, never goes away, but exclusive games certainly are, and I am all for it. That does it for me this week. Thank you very much for hanging out. This was Cosmoronic number 18. I'm Fringy, and I'll catch you all next time.